The U.S. is preparing for a presidential transition like no other in history. After inciting the violent storming of Congress, Donald Trump now says that he will break with tradition and stay away from his successor's inauguration. It will be a sober ceremony for President-elect Biden next week, with security services on high alert amidst warnings that right-wing groups could be planning to repeat the angry protests at the Capitol. Congress has responded to the storming by initiating a second impeachment against Trump, who has been banned by social media. But the outgoing president continues to claim he is the rightful winner of the election, and his supporters believe him. Our title today, Joe Biden becomes U.S. president, but how dangerous does Donald Trump remain? Hello and welcome to the Point. It's a pleasure to welcome our guests. Markus Kaim is foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the SWP Institute for International and Security Affairs here in Berlin. And he says Trump might for now leave the political stage, but his 74 million followers won't be going away. And it's great to have with us Jamie Fly. He is a Republican who is currently working with the German Marshall Fund in Berlin. He says Donald Trump's ability to threaten American democracy is fading, but his legacy will loom large over the country for years to come. And Soraya Nelson is a freelance journalist based here in Berlin. She works with it has the podcast Common Ground and is a former correspondent for the U.S. Public Radio, NPR. She says, barring conviction in the U.S. Senate, Donald Trump will retain his hold on the Republican Party. So our title asks how dangerous Trump will remain. Let's begin with the present and the immediate future. Soraya Nelson, how great is the threat of violent attacks in the coming days?
I think it's very high. I mean, you can see that with 20,000 National Guard and other troops that are basically deployed to the U.S. Capitol. I mean, that's, what is it, at this point, 5 times as many as you have in Afghanistan, which is a much more dangerous place, just to give you some point of comparison. So it's very dangerous, and certainly the authorities there are reacting in that way. It's quite the lockdown in Washington, from what I understand. People are having a really hard time getting back and forth, going to work, and obviously we saw yesterday at the Capitol how people how people are having a hard time getting into the Capitol at all, unless they go through metal detectors, even if they're members.
Jimmy Fly, you said in your opening statement that Trump's ability to threaten U.S. democracy is fading, but just 2 days ago, he held a rally at the southern border of the United States, once again denied responsibility for fomenting that attack at the Capitol, and portrayed himself as the victim of a witch hunt. Doesn't he thereby stoke the ongoing anger of his supporters and also their urge to take violent revenge?
I think there's some potential for that, given that he still is not embracing the fact that Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the next president. However, if you look at his statements, including the video he put out yesterday, he is singing a different tune, certainly, than he was in the weeks running up to January 6th. He actually is urging his people not to be violent. He never even talked in those terms prior to all of this. The reasons for that are unclear, whether it's his own personal interest and he's trying to stave off conviction. But I don't think he is trying to incite the sort of frenzy that we saw on January 6th at this point. And honestly, he doesn't have the platform to amplify that message, even if he wanted to. And so I think all in all, we're in a better place than we were on January 6th. The key question is, what groups are going to show up, and will law enforcement and the intelligence community be better prepared this time? And indications are that they will, but we have to see.
Markus Kaim, authorities are now releasing new findings about the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. As a security expert, would you say that these indicate that that was, in fact, a planned, intentional attack, or was it rather a spontaneous outburst by a mob that essentially got out of control?
I'm not sure, but what seems sure to me is that actually we could expect some kind of violence even earlier. I think we wouldn't be surprised if we would have seen something like political violence in the context of the election process at the beginning of November. Actually, I was expecting some polling stations being burning or something being looted or something else. So I think nobody could predict what could happen and what would happen at the Capitol 1 week ago. But actually, we shouldn't be surprised about the determination of these kind of groups, and therefore I'm not sure if we should call it a plan or a schedule or whatever, but I think it comes as no surprise given the polarization and deep division of the US society that there are some actors, some groups being determined to perpetrate violent acts against democratic institutions.
Soraya, hasn't the FBI indicated that there definitely was some measure of concerted action here? We have some very heavily armed individuals who moved toward the Capitol, who came from far away, so clearly with intent. We also have some indications of very lax security at the Capitol, and today even reports that apparently there were abnormally high visitor numbers on the day before January 6th, indicating perhaps that people were casing the joint.
And some allegations, in fact, that certain Republican congressmen who have not been named, at least as of this morning, who were giving tours to people, sort of reconnaissance tours, if you will, to people who were then said to have been involved in the attacks on Saturday, on the following day, on Wednesday. So it's very disturbing. I mean, it does seem that there was some forethought and some planning that went into it. And it's something that I don't think will go away. I mean, I as mentioned, I mean, I think there are a lot of very angry people out there on that side in particular. And right now, I'm sure that the anger is being stoked by the fact that the president is stepping back from being fully supportive of what was going on. He's no longer saying, "I love you." He's now saying, I don't condone violence. But it's important to note that this is not necessarily an orchestrated, that everything is not necessarily orchestrated, because look at what's happening at the airports when congressmen are being approached by individuals who are getting in their face. I mean, there are all these videos that are being posted now about that sort of aggressive
Mitt Romney,
attack.
for example, flying to Washington and being called a traitor
by people who were on the plane, or even more recently was, I think, Congressman Correa from California, who was accosted at Dulles International Airport just a few days ago.
Jamie Fry, Soraya just mentioned it. There are indications that several state congressional representatives of state parliaments, but also possibly two members of the House of Representatives, the federal Congress, were taking part in this invasion of the Capitol. For you as a Republican, how does that make you feel?
Oh, it's obviously disgraceful for the Republican Party, but this is the problem. After 4 years of Donald Trump, he has brought the fringe basically into the mainstream of the Republican Party. You now have Republican members of Congress who were elected as open supporters of the conspiracy theory QAnon. And to the credit of House Republican leadership, they initially tried to defeat these people in primaries, but when they still won the primaries, the House leadership, people like Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, embraced them and said, we'll welcome you as a normal member. And so, yes, you have people inside the Capitol, members of Congress, who are very much in line, I think, ideologically with some of the angry mob that was, tearing down the windows and doors of the Capitol. And so it's a frightening development, I think, even for the ability of Congress as an institution to move forward when you have so much distrust within the body itself. And you even had members on the Democratic side accusing Republican members of live tweeting the location of Nancy Pelosi during the riot. And when you're at that level, when you don't even trust your fellow lawmaker, I think it's very difficult to unite the country and to actually move forward together.
Let's take a closer look at the followers who took up Trump's call to march on the Capitol.
Incited by Donald Trump's accusations of election fraud, his supporters blaze a trail of destruction through the Capitol. The insurrection is hitting American democracy right in the heart, and in doing so, the rioters believe that they are well within their rights.
We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens, and you guys did this to us. We want our country back. We are protesting for our freedom right now.
Facebook and Twitter since suspended Donald Trump's accounts so he can't continue to incite more violence. But he and his supporters are here to stay. Donald Trump has already announced that he will open his own media channel.
Today is not the end, it's just the beginning.
But just how much of a danger do Donald Trump and his supporters pose to the next U.S. president, Joe Biden?
Normal, good, law-abiding citizens, Markus Kaim, if you see those pictures, at least to many people abroad, they look a lot like a putsch.
I won't call it a putsch because nobody really intended to fight for the political power or to
take back our country. Isn't that code language for essentially not handing over power to the Democrats?
I'm not sure, but I think what has been revealed by the pictures is that there's a huge disrespect for democratic institutions, a huge disrespect for democratic procedures, and a huge disrespect for the political opponent, which in German terms is the political opponent, but in US terms has become actually the enemy, which has to be excluded out from the political discourse. And this is not US specific. I think you could make the same argument that political groups here in Germany reflect on the same, reflect this or represent the same ideas. But this is the really frightening and concerning issue here, that regardless of the specific institutional affiliation or the specific group they belong to, they're united by this united bond of disrespect. And disrespect for the media could be added as well. This united bond of disrespect, and my concern is that won't go away for the foreseeable future.
Certainly, Soraya Nelson, President Trump did a great deal to stoke those resentments with language that took political discourse in a new direction over the past 4 years. Social media platforms have now decided to bar him, after doing a lot to enable him over the last 4 years. Do you think that's necessary and right, or is there a risk that this will only reinforce the myth of his martyrdom?
I think the latter. I think that at least in the initial stages here, and it depends on who else is silenced. I mean, because certainly his son and other, his supporters are talking about the fact that he has been censored and that this is wrong and that he's, freedom is now gone, and these are all very insightful sort of comments and approaches that I think are just going to fan those flames and reinforce the notion, as Markus mentioned, that there is an enemy rather than a political opponent.
You seem to take a different view on that, Jamie Fry. You said a moment ago that barring him from social media would significantly decrease his influence.
I think that in his particular case, he obviously violated the terms of service of these platforms on so many occasions. I think the companies actually should have acted a long time ago, and not just with him. I mean, I think the danger is where this is headed is I don't know that the private companies have the capabilities or are the people that we should have policing our speech. And so we have a fundamental problem in democracies, especially in the United States, where there hasn't been significant regulation. And now the fact that he and other conservatives are starting to get their accounts shut down, it is increasing this sense of victimhood. And the term for it on the right is cancel culture. And so I don't think we found the right approach. I do think in this interim period, it was the right thing to remove his platform because I think he could have done a lot more damage in the run-up to the inauguration. But the companies ultimately need, and working with the government, need to come up with a better solution. And it's not just Donald Trump. Honestly, the more concerning thing are the far right and far left groups, the extremists, the QAnon conspiracy theorists. And the companies also were very slow to tackle the rise of those groups online and the way that those groups used their platforms for organizing the very sort of gathering that occurred on January 6th.
We could clearly devote the rest of this show and many others to the role of social media, but let me take us on to the newly inaugurated impeachment proceedings, the second impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell, who is still the Senate Majority Leader, that will change after next week, but he says that he also thinks impeachment actually might be a way to separate the Republican Party, essentially, from Donald Trump as a harmful influence going forward. Do you think that's right?
I think it's potentially right just because of the technicalities of it. It at least opens a path towards Donald Trump being barred from running for federal office. I think there's some constitutional questions that will probably have to get resolved if conviction does occur in the Senate. That may lead more senators to be willing to convict than was the case a year ago in the previous impeachment. But I think, especially given the limited showing of Republicans that we saw yesterday, only 10 in the House vote for impeachment, it's not at all a foregone conclusion that there will be enough senators, Republican senators, who are willing to convict this president. He remains largely popular, even after the events of January 6th. And a lot of his voters, I think, are very likely to turn on politicians in the Republican Party who vote to convict him, and especially if it involves barring him from federal office in the future.
Let's drill a little bit deeper on that, Markus Kaim. For anybody who did watch that congressional debate yesterday, it was striking how many Republicans continued to justify Donald Trump's unconstitutional actions by essentially pointing at the finger at the Democrats and listing all the alleged wrongs they had committed. Why do so many stick by this man?
I think Jamie made exactly the point, the right point. We are already approaching the next election, the midterm elections, and the experience of the last 4 years told us that every Republican who is distancing him or herself from Donald Trump becomes the target of some kind of political revenge. By the Republicans and in particular by the president. So even with Donald Trump about to lose power in the foreseeable future, I think he remains a pivotal player in the political scene. And everybody, at least in the Republican Party, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people in the political party are simply afraid of him. And that explains that maybe silently they would vote differently or would have voted differently yesterday, but they cannot express publicly.
On the other hand, Soraya, in America, politicians need not only voters, but also donors, lots of money. And we are seeing increasingly important business interests distancing themselves from Donald Trump, including the banks that have loaned him money over many, many years. What impact could that have on the Republican Party and Trumpism going forward?
I think that would have the most impact out of everything that we've talked about. But you have to look at the language that these businesses are stating when they say that they're pulling back. It's temporary. I mean, there are very few who've said that we're absolutely not going to donate to him. We're absolutely not going to donate to Republicans. Even like the amounts, for example, that were given to Hawley, 1,000 here, 1,000 there. It's not. There's a question about whether this is something that's really that they plan to sustain, but it definitely has gotten the Republican attention. Having said all that, I think in the end, 74 million voters. It was 74.2 million voters voted for Donald Trump. You cannot discount this. I mean, he received, even though the GOP has lost the seven out of the last 8, popular vote. When you look at the elections, 7 out of 8 of them. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is a large number of people. And they even after what happened on January 6th, most of them still remain loyal to Donald Trump. And the people who you see leaving the GOP, or, they're all people who are more moderate, or basically traditional GOP is what's going away. There are not, I haven't heard or read about really anybody who is a MAGA person who has, felt what happened on the 6th was so bad that they should abandon Donald Trump.
Jamie, could the Republican Party win the popular majority if it alienates a large segment of the Trump voters?
No, I think, honestly, because of the demographic changes underway in the U.S., it's highly unlikely the Republican Party will be able to win the popular vote in a presidential election anytime soon. Their hope is the Electoral College. And I think many feared that Donald Trump was actually compromising that potentially in recent months, given his legal campaign. related to the state legislatures and issues like that. So honestly, that's the conundrum they're in. 74.2 million votes was an incredible success for Donald Trump compared to the expectations. He actually increased minority support for Republicans, which no one expected. And so the talk after November was about the Republican Party becoming a multiracial working class party, taking the working class away from the Democratic Party. That is probably more difficult now after January 6th and a very white mob, essentially, that seemed to have a racial agenda in many cases.
Well, and Donald Trump repeatedly playing the racist card.
Yes, but again, he drew more African-American men to the Republican Party in that election, Hispanics. And so some of the more moderate figures in the party, my old boss, Marco Rubio, Governor Nikki Haley, I think their hope was then to take what Donald Trump did to bring more working class voters and to kind of soften the edges. I think that becomes, again, much more difficult given what we've seen over the last week, but that was their hope. And we'll have to see whether Donald Trump is able to be an organized political force in Republican politics once he leaves office.
Soraya, super quick question, because I do want to take a look at what all this means for Biden and Harris. But let's say that Trump, going forward, did split away from the Republican Party and found his own independent movement, and that somehow he got enough money to also create the media empire that our report mentioned. Would such a movement be able to win, again, a majority popular election in the United States?
Historically, it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, look at Ross Perot. He didn't go very far with it either. I have a hard time imagining that he would be successful in doing that. And I think creating this media empire that he wants to create, that's going to require money that he doesn't necessarily have right now. So I'm cautiously optimistic that he won't do that he will try to stick with the Republicans, and that this is going to cause great issues for that party. I don't think it's going to come together soon.
So beyond the political polarization that we've been discussing, the incoming Democratic team faces a pandemic that continues to rage across much of America and is exacting a painful human and economic toll. Are Joe Biden and Kamala Harris up to the challenges that they face?
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. This duo will steer the fate of the U.S. for the next 4 years. The stage is set for the incoming U.S. president and his second in command. After also winning the runoff in Georgia, Democrats have a razor-thin majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate for the first time in a very long time. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will be the deciding vote that will also allow Democrats to push their agenda through the legislature in the future, giving them some much-needed breathing room. For example, when appointing Supreme Court judges in the future. Or on new spending proposals for coronavirus, the environment, and socioeconomic policies. All proposals that Republicans are likely to block. There may be only a short window of opportunity to pass important legislation. The midterm elections are coming up next year. By then, the razor-thin Democratic majority could be gone. How much of the Democratic agenda can Biden and Harris really get past?
The United States Capitol, breaking windows, breaking doors.
So let me ask all three of you. Joe Biden has repeatedly promised to be the president of all Americans, to heal the divisions. Markus Kaim, you said in your opening statement he must find ways to appeal to the Trump voters. How? What are the first things he needs to do? 1, 2, 3 in his first 100 days.
I think the first task is pretty obvious: cope with the consequences of the COVID crisis. And the second one, I would recommend something not to do, not to reverse the tax reform of the Trump administration, because that's brought so many people into labor, in particularly the low income class, and given the public opinion polls of February, of March, before the COVID crisis, it becomes obvious that the economic success of the Trump administration was crucial for his endurance and for the success of the Trump administration. And here I would be very cautious simply to reverse what has been accomplished over the last year.
Jamie Frey, what would you say? What are the absolute top priorities for the incoming administration if they're serious about healing the division?
I really think it's one, and for me, coming from a Republican perspective, is to avoid the progressive impulse. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has the smallest House majority I think, since after the Second World War. A 50-50 Senate, despite the fact that they have the vice president who can break ties, is not really control of the Senate unless you remove the filibuster, which would be incredibly damaging, I think, to the ability of the country to move forward. And I think Joe Biden understands that, given his general approach to politics. But he's going to be getting prodded by the left of his party, and he's going to need to realize that he's president for 4 years, and he can ignore those calls for now while he tries to bring the country together.
Soraya?
Well, if he's really desperate, I mean, if things aren't getting better, then pardon Trump. I mean, take that wind away, not make that man look like a martyr. I mean, that's something that he may have to actually consider. I can't believe I'm saying that a day after he's been impeached, but,
How about the economic policy that Biden has promised to really give the middle class relief, to bolster good jobs, good wages, and so on? Will that reach the disaffected Trump voters?
Well, he has to make sure it does. I mean, he has to win back that workers' party because, as Jamie mentioned, the Republicans have become, or the GOP has become the workers' party, which is not traditionally what has been the case.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.